everyone, Nikki here. Last week I uploaded a Silhouette Studio video showing how to split an apple of a free file that I've shared, add a name, and then also embellish the apple with a flower that was also shared. This week's version is for Cricut users. At the time of recording this, I'm using the latest version of Cricut Design Space, and I've popped the version number on the screen. I can't do everything that I did in the Silhouette video, but I've replicated as much as I possibly can. You can download the files free from my Ko-fi page, and I'm happy for you to sell anything that you make using them, but please don't sell or share the digital files. I've already gone ahead and uploaded the combined SGV file to Cricut Design Space. Included is the main apple body, and then we've got two stems, one with a single stalk and one with two stalks, and there are two leaves to use with those. And then we have the little flower as well. Currently all the objects are grouped together, and I'm just going to resize this so it's 6 by 7, as they're the measurements I know I want to work with today. And I've done this before ungrouping so that all the objects are resized proportionally. For the first part of the video I don't need the leaves, stalks or flower, so I'm going to group together the stalks and the leaves, and I'll rename the group simply by clicking on it and typing in a new name. And I'll do the same with the flower. With both groups selected, I'll just shift them off to the side by changing the X coordinates, but I can obviously still grab any of the items by clicking on them in the Layers panel. And although there is a small image that shows you what they are, renaming them can help you find them quickly, especially as after a time you can end up with a lot of objects in the Layers panel that are named group. What I want to do today is split the apple so that we can add a name in between the two sections. So we're going to go over to our Shapes panel, and you can grab either the square or the rectangle, it doesn't really matter. This rectangle has rounded corners, but as they're going to extend past the edges of the apple, it's not an issue. I'll reduce the width a bit, and I know I want this to be 1 inch high. But obviously you can select the width whatever you want it to be. And that's the nice thing about editing your own shapes. It gives you more freedom, more control. Now I want to duplicate my rectangles, and then I'm going to align them so they are directly on top of each other. We could then select everything and go to Align Center, but I personally like to have my rectangle slightly off center, as putting it too low can make your apple look a bit odd due to the curve, as the lower half can end up being a lot narrower than the top half. So I'm going to select both the rectangles and move them up slightly using the arrow keys on my keyboard. I will then drag the apple layer up in the side panel so all the ones I'm working with are next to each other. I will then select the top rectangle and the apple, which I've done by holding down the control button on my keyboard. I always remember that because it gives me more control over what I'm selecting. I'll slice them, and then we can go through the Layers panel and delete the slice results we don't need. So now we're left with the split apple and the duplicate rectangle, and if I hide that for a moment you can see the slice result more clearly. I don't want this rectangle to move, so I will group it with the apple and rename it. And now we can look to add a name into our apple where we've sliced it. So I'll click on the text tool, and then I'll just bring it over so it's a bit easier to see. And I'll type my favourite teacher's name from 40 plus years ago, and that was Miss Barnes. Then we need to pick a font. Today I'm using a system font, so one that's installed on my PC. Then I don't have to worry about Cricut's Angel policy, and I'll pick one that I know I have a commercial license to use, which is important if you are going to be making this to sell. As we typed the name before selecting the font, as we click on each different font, we can see the text changes and we can see what it's going to look like. And rather you sitting here having to watch me scroll through, many of them, I've already decided that today I'm going to use Bilderberg. It's a nice bold font, but not too stark. I'll just change the colour of it because we're going to be placing it on the black rectangle, and then we'll pull it up into place. Because of how this font was originally created by the designer, there is a lot of extra white space around each character, and that can make it difficult to resize. So I'm going to ungroup all the letters and then group them again. And this gives me better control to be able to resize the height and the width of it. Then I'll rename it so that it's easier to find. And at this point we could also add the name of the font here in case we need it for future reference. I'm then going to select the name and the rectangle and use that to align the name. If I'd have done this by selecting the apple and the name, then obviously it wouldn't have put it in the right place, which is why the extra rectangle comes in handy. So all the pieces are kept together. I want to add that into the apple group, but rather than selecting both and clicking on group again, which automatically renames it to group, I'm actually going to grab the name and drag it into the group. And by placing it above the rectangle, we can still see it. If I'd placed it lower down in the list, it would be hidden underneath the rectangle. So the order of items in your group is also something to keep in mind. Before we go to the next step, I just want to show you why I did all my characters in capital letters rather than a mix of upper and lower case. If I type out a name using the same font, and again we'll change the colour of it so we can see it, and ungroup it and then group it again, so just like we did with the other font. Because a lot of our characters have tails on them, this can dictate how we position and size the text. So unlike when we do it all in capital letters, it's difficult to align the name to centre without having a lot of empty space around characters, depending on where the tails sit. And if you wanted to weld the name into the apple body, it's not really possible when everything is a mixture of upper and lower case characters. Now that we've split our apple and added our name, we could leave it as that, but there is another step we can do. You may find that you've got a really long name that you need to add into the apple, but it's not possible to change the overall size of the apple to accommodate it. So to get around this, we can add some bars to the bottom of the top and the top of the bottom of the apple. Now you could add regular rectangles with full straight edges, but I personally prefer to add rounded rectangles. So I'm going to show you how we can achieve that, but I'll start with how we can't do it first of all. If we go to our shapes menu, they do have a rectangle that's got rounded corners, and that works fine when you're resizing it proportionally. But because we want our rectangle to be long and narrow, you'll see that the ends flatten out. Now, there is a hack you can do. If you grab a line from the shapes menu, I'll rotate this so it's horizontal, and then we go to offset, and with the rounded corner selected, and by hitting apply, that gives us a rounded rectangle. And then sometimes you have to repeat that, do exactly the same. Then select everything and then hit weld. And then we change it to a basic line rather than score. Now that works well, but again, it's not ideal for what we want today, as you can end up with pointy ends, which if that's the look you're going for, fine, it's not an issue. You can see though how it differs when you put it against the rounded rectangle that we started with and make them roughly the same size. But because our rectangle is going to be quite narrow with rounded ends, we need to create that ourselves, which is pretty easy to do using other shapes that are available. So if we go back to our shapes menu, and this time I'm going to grab a circle and a square. And we'll start with the square first. And I know that my apple is 6 inches across, so I'm going to make this 7 inches. So we've got ½ inch overhang each side. And for now I'll just estimate the width of it, or the height of it I should say. And then if we bring back the apple, we can then use that as a guide. And then we have to think about how much space is it going to take up, how much overlap do we want. We could have obviously made the split wider when we first did it. This one's a little bit too wide, so I'm going to halve it down to 0.125, and then we will make our circles the same size. I'll also change it to a brighter colour so we can see it more clearly, especially as it is so small. And then we'll duplicate that, because obviously we need one for both ends. Now, as we want our final rectangle to be 7 inches in length, we need to account for the 2 circles that we're adding to the end. So we need to change the length to 6.875. So we're effectively taking off the width of one of the circles. Now we'll get the apple out of the way for a moment. And I'll select everything and align it. And then we'll start with this end first. And I'm going to align left, which, because the circles are underneath the rectangle in the layers panel, they get hidden. And then let's zoom in so that we can see everything a lot more clearly. So if we click on the right circle on the left hand side, and then you can see the crosshairs that show you where the circle is, and you can see where the centre is. So all we're going to do is, using our arrow keys on our keyboard, is nudge it over until the middle of the cross lines up with the end of the rectangle. Then we can select both and go over to the bottom menu and hit weld. So now that's welded that circle, and then we'll go over and I'll change this one to black just so that we know it's different, and I'll select that and the rectangle, do align right, so again it's hidden. Then we'll do exactly the same thing and nudge it to the end. But you'll notice this time when we do weld, it doesn't actually do what we want it to do, and it does this sometimes. It's a little glitch, but easy to resolve. So we'll just undo that, and then we'll take the circle, and again using the arrow keys we'll just nudge it back one, and then we'll select both and do weld again, and this time it's worked out fine. And our length is just under 7 inches, so we can easily rectify that. It won't make any difference, as it was just such a small difference. Then we can bring back our apple, although we don't need the name in the rectangle. Then I'll duplicate this, and then we'll select everything and centre horizontally. Now if I move the apple up so that the rectangles are underneath it, that can help us to align things, as unfortunately you can't unfill any shapes in Cricut Design Space. But as you can see, we can tell when it's behind the apple, and it's just a question of lining it up how you want it to be. And sometimes the grey outline when you've got it selected can help too. So then we'll just select everything once we're happy, and again hit weld. Although you could here do unite until you're sure everything is fine, and then we'll change it back to red, although that's not the original red we started with, but that's not important. And then when I bring back the name, you can see we've obviously lost a little bit of space, but nothing too much. And we can then look to make some alterations and realign the name until we're happy with it. So we could make it a little bit smaller, and then we could use the rectangle again so that we can align it properly. And if we wanted to, we could make it so that it's wider than the gap. Moving it up again in the layers panel so it's in front of the apple again helps, because it shows us how much it's overlapping more clearly. And then you can just tweak that. I could change the colour of it, although I haven't picked the exact same red here, and that sometimes helps you see how it's all going to be. And then we can go in and weld it all, although you could do unite here until you're sure that's how you want it. And then I like to bring back the leaves, and I'll just do that quickly by changing the X and Y coordinates. And then I'll ungroup those so I can select just the pieces that I want, and then I can do a quick layout of what the final design is going to be. And then I always find it helps just to lean back in my chair and take a look at it from a bit of a distance to see if I'm happy with it. And then all that's left to do is to cut out your decal or save it for later. For the final part of today's video, I want to cut some flowers out of the body of the apple, and I want them coming down the inside edge of the apple, increasing in size so the smallest is at the top and the largest is at the bottom. The first thing I'm going to do is change the colour of it, and then unlock the padlock so I can round up the measurements so both the height and width are at 1.5 inches. Then I'm going to make a copy of this flower just by holding down the Alt key, and whilst holding the left mouse button down, dragging one off. And we can change the size of that one to 1.25 inches. And then I'll do exactly the same with a third flower and make that 1 inch in height and width. So each flower has been reduced by 0.25 of an inch, or 1/4. And then we can drag them onto the body of the apple and position them however we like, spacing them out and also rotating them in any direction that we wish. And once you're happy with them, we can select all three, group them, and then I'm going to duplicate and do flip horizontal. So then I've made a copy which I can position on the left hand side, and then selecting both of them I can do align top, so I can make sure that they're both even. Before I go any further, I'm just going to make a copy of the apple and one of the sets of flowers, and I'll just drag that off to the side so it's out the way. And then I'm going to select everything and I'm going to do subtract, and that's now cut out the flowers from the body of the apple. So when you cut this, the petals of the flowers will be cut out, but the centres will remain because the centre of the flower was open. And now if I bring back the copy I made, I can show you a different way to remove the flowers from the apple. And I'll ungroup them because we need to do these each individually. So I'll select one and then the apple, and this time I'll hit slice and I'll drag off the result. Then we'll click on the second flower up and the apple and do slice again. And it doesn't matter that the flower is behind the apple, as long as it's selected it will still slice from it. And then we'll do exactly the same with the third flower. And this time we'll just move the apple rather than the flowers. And now I want to make use of the contour tool, which when I select the first one that I did, you'll see the contour tool isn't available, but with the second one it is. So I'll just tidy up these stray flowers so there's not too much clutter on the screen, but I always like to keep one just in case. Then I'm going to make a copy of this, go into the contour menu, and I'm going to deselect everything apart from the centres of the flowers. So they are all that remain, and they are already grouped. And then when we bring back in the duplicate and hit contour, this time we'll just get rid of those centres. So now you can see that the whole of the flower has been removed. If I change the colour of this just to make things a little bit easier, just so they show up a bit more, and drag them over, you can see this is how we can then layer our vinyl decal or whatever it is we're making. And this just makes it a little bit easier to do that. And what you could do is, although it wastes vinyl, you could cut them out as they're spaced, which again will make life easier when layering, so you haven't got to line up each individual small centre. Now yes, you can do it with the original apple that we did, but it's a little bit more fiddly because you've got to remove the centres, and then you've also got to create the circles for the centres separately. But this just gives you an option of how you can use different tools in different ways. I hope you found today's video useful. Be sure to give me a like, especially if you've learnt some tips and tricks that you weren't aware of before. There'll be some more Cricut videos in the future, and if you subscribe to my channel, be sure to hit the bell to be notified when new videos are released. Bye for now.